why have you written this letter now, specifically?
Well, I've been thinking about it for a long time. I mean, you know, I think you may remember my partner, Fiona, she resigned from the Labour Party a year ago now. And we've talked about it a lot since then, virtually every day. And I think the final sort of coalescence, as it were, of me deciding this was the right thing to do, I've just been in Australia, and it was listening to Labour politicians there telling me how they just had not faced up to the reality that they all knew, which was that the country were not going to elect their leader as Prime Minister. And that was a leader, Bill Shorten, whose poll ratings were way ahead of what Jeremy Corbyn's are now. And I think also it's seeing the complete lack of strategic response to the arrival of a new Prime Minister. I mean, Boris Johnson's come in, he's boxed himself into a no-deal Brexit situation, whether he realises that or not. I think he does. He doesn't believe he can win a referendum. No deal against no Brexit. I think no Brexit wins by a landslide. So his only hope is he gets a mandate through a general election. He blames Europe, he blames Parliament, he blames the civil service, he blames business. He then sets up for a general election because he doesn't think that the country will elect Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. And I'm afraid I think the country has decided about Jeremy Corbyn. I think all of the things that we've heard so much about, whether it's his failure to lead on Brexit, facing both ways, it's anti-Semitism, it's this hard left sectarian nasty politics that he's come to maybe not represent, but he certainly has unleashed or allowed to be unleashed inside the Labour Party. And I think the country looks at the choice we have now of Prime Minister, Johnson or Corbyn, and just millions of people just feel, no, we're not having this.
What do you want to achieve? What do you hope to achieve from writing this letter and making it public?
Well, look, I mean, in the end, it's the reason I guess I've ended up thinking about this so deeply is because I did get expelled from the Labour Party for voting Liberal Democrat tactically in the European elections. I've been going through the process of an appeal. I've got what my lawyers consider to be an absolutely watertight case, but it's just, I've just thought, in a sense, I guess what I'm trying to achieve is to get, one, to try to persuade the country to wake up to just how bad things are going to be if Boris Johnson drives through this no-deal Brexit, but is also to basically to say what I know so many Labour MPs and so many Labour members think, which is that the Labour Party is not in a winning position. So I guess all it's doing is trying to speak truth to power, which, you know, I'm no longer the kind of the player, if you like, inside the top echelons of the Labour Party that once I was. That's all I can do is speak truth to power, keep trying to fight to get the referendum on Brexit that I think the country needs and wants and is entitled to. But just do that, I guess, now from the context, for the first time in my life, of not being inside the Labour Party.
Are you trying to, I don't know, embarrass or poke him? Because, as you say, you're not the influential figure that you were during, 1997 and after that, during the 10 years of Tony Blair. And is it not reasonable to say that Corbyn does still have an awful lot of support amongst grassroots Labour members?
Well, look, I say in my letter that if there was a leadership election tomorrow, he would probably win it again. But I think it's gone beyond that. It's gone beyond who's up and who's down inside the Labour Party. I think the country is facing a moment of absolute peril. I think that we've now got this ill-qualified, ill-intentioned, populist, right-wing leader who's become leader with a different set of lies to the lies that he told to win the referendum. And Labour is just, they're not remotely in a winning position. And I don't think that's unfair to point that out. I think that it's, if you go back, you mentioned 1997, if you go back to 94 to 97, and indeed before that under Neil Kinnock and John Smith, the work rate that you have to oust a sitting government, and I just don't see it. I see complacency, I see an irritation whenever he's asked about Brexit or anti-Semitism. I see him just not rising to the challenge, and I think we've just got to stop pretending that somehow it's all going to be fine on the night, because it's not unless there is major radical change, at the top.
Who is it who irritates you more? Is it Jeremy Corbyn or is it Boris Johnson?
It's not a question of being irritated. I actually, look, I really, really, really dislike Boris Johnson for what he represents. I think he's a charlatan, I think he's a liar, I think he's a journalist who's never stopped being a journalist. I think he's a disaster for Britain, and that came home to me when I was in Australia last week, where people were just saying, my God, what is your country doing having him as Prime Minister? And I had to explain it was the Tory party that picked him. And look, this is not personal against Jeremy Corbyn, it really isn't. I think he's done a lot of good things. I think he campaigned in the last election a lot better than I thought he would, and a lot better than other people did. But that just made me angry that he hadn't campaigned like that in the referendum campaign. But a lot of what I've seen since then, it just isn't stepping up to the challenge that's facing him and that's facing the country. And I think the country's in despair about this. Millions of people are looking at that choice now for Prime Minister, Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn, in total despair. And I think we've just got to be honest about that.
If not Jeremy Corbyn, then whom?
Leading Labour or leading the country?
Let's go with Labour to start with.
Well, I don't want to kind of put out names, and as I said in the piece, this is not part of some kind of plot going on to, you know, get somebody else in there or new party, any of that stuff. I'm not involved in any of that. This is just a very personal decision about my position within the Labour Party. But I think there are good people in the Labour Party. But in the end, you don't know until they get there. You don't know until they get close to these top positions of whether they can do it. But I think that, you know, it's not just about Jeremy Corbyn. If I look right across the piece about how many of the front bench are even known by the public, how many of our policies are even known by the public, and that's because that basic professional campaigning just doesn't, it seem to me, go on. And one of the other points I make is that, you know, the record of a three-term Labour government, the only time that has ever happened in our history. And here's the thing, Kay, Eton College, that one school which frankly ought to be in special measures for the damage it's heaped on our country through Cameron and Johnson and Rees-Mogg and the rest of them, that one school has produced 3 times more Prime Ministers in our history than the Labour Party. That just underlines how hard it is to win power in this country when you're coming from the left. So I just think you've got to call it out, truthfully.
But it was ever thus. You know, it's always been harder for Labour to win a general election, has it not, than the right wing of the country. But from what you're saying, and from picking up from how you're describing your views at the moment, it's the lethargy within the whole party. It's not just at the top. It goes right down through the party. And, you know, people like, I don't know, Yvette Cooper, people like that, are not potentially doing what they should be doing. I'm guessing, I don't know, interesting to hear your views, to try and lift the party up again.
But listen, I think that I say in my piece, which people can read the whole thing, it's on the New European website, and extracts are in The Guardian. But I make the point that this is much harder for MPs than it is for me. I'm not an MP, I'm not a candidate. It's much harder for them. They're in there, they have to go out to their constituents and argue for a Labour government, knowing that that means Jeremy Corbyn's Prime Minister, when most of them, or a lot of them certainly, don't think that's actually credible. But I think people like Yvette and Hilary Benn and others have made huge contributions from the backbenches. But I think people look at both front benches at the moment, and that new government, I mean, it's just desperate. You see, Priti Patel is the Home Secretary. Gavin Williamson is the Education Secretary. These are people who, what they've done in their past as ministers, if they were head teachers or chief of police, they wouldn't get another job. And now they're back in even more senior important positions. And that only happens if the opposition is weak enough to let it happen. So I just think, you know, I do get very angry about this, but it's the government that makes me most angry, because they're completely screwing the country. Brexit is a disaster, Johnson is a disaster, but that's why you need, it's so bad, any half-decent opposition right now with a proper strategy, ably led, with a good team, they'd be destroying these people, and it's just not happening.
So why aren't you stepping up to the plate?
To do what?
To potentially
I'm not
be
gonna get
an MP?
Well, I could, but listen, I know I've left, but, you know, I've been Labour all my life. I have been, the first election that I voted in, Harold Wilson was Prime Minister. I stuck with Labour, admittedly as a journalist, but also as a close friend of Neil Kinnock through the whole militant time. I supported Michael Foot against Margaret Thatcher. You know, I've always been Labour. I couldn't imagine supporting another party, but I do think that something is going to have to give. This is unsustainable. Johnson against Corbyn as the choice for leading our country at this critical time in our history, it's an unsustainable choice. Something has to give. Now, what role I play in that, I don't even know because I haven't even thought about it. It's taken me a long time to reach this decision that I've reached today. I'm a ruminating sort of person, and I've been ruminating a lot. But I feel now that I'm still kind of a bit, I can't pretend that it's 100% black and white. I love the Labour Party. I think the Labour Party has done so much for this country. And one of the things that angers me about Corbyn and his team and the communists and the Stalinists who are around him and the sock puppets that they unleash on anybody who dares criticise him is that they have done as much, frankly, as the Tories to undermine the record of very successful Labour governments who've done amazing things for this country.
But why turn your back on your party when they need you the most? You know, that famous phrase, now is the time for all good men and women to come to the aid of the party.
Well, to be absolutely frank, Kay, because they don't want the Blairites, they don't want the people who are New Labour, they don't want the people who won 3 elections. They want to be able to say, that was the past, the world began when Jeremy became leader, and we don't need those people. And this is the other crazy thing about the way they approach things. I mean, they didn't win. I say in my piece that I met one of Jeremy Corbyn's people to talk about my own position in the party. And he actually said at one point, when we won in 2017, and I said, hold on a minute, you didn't win, we lost. Theresa May became the Prime Minister. You're the opposition still, we're the opposition still. So that mentality that says doing better than we thought we would is winning. We were devastated in 2005 because our majority had gone from 3 figures to 2. I mean, it's, the Labour Party it's a party of government. And at the moment, I don't see any real, credible, coherent strategy that says to me they have thought through how they're going to take on and beat populism and Boris Johnson.
Will you do like Chuka Umunna has and potentially join another party?
I don't know. Right at this moment, I just don't know. I can't imagine being anything other than Labour. But I do think that because of the unique set of circumstances that is happening at the moment, look, my MP is Keir Starmer. I think he's a good MP. I wish he'd maybe done a bit more to fight Brexit, but he's done a very good job in incredibly difficult circumstances. Whether I end up voting for him or not, I don't know. I didn't vote Labour in the European elections for reasons I set out. They were tactical. It might be if I lived in Scotland. I don't know what I'd vote up there. If you've got a by-election coming up on Thursday, all sorts of things are going to happen in our politics. And this idea of these two sort of, behemoth parties that they're forever going to go sort of Tory Labour, I sense that's changing. And one of the reasons is that I say in the piece that politics in the end is not about people like me, and it's not about people like these people who are on Twitter 24/7 sort of abusing everybody who disagrees with them. It's about people who actually don't obsess with politics. And what they want from their politicians is people who just do a good job in the national interest. And they look at the 2 main parties at the moment. One has been captured by the forces of Brexit. One has been captured by the forces of the hard left, and a pretty nasty hard left at that, let me tell you. And in the middle, millions of people just thinking, well, who the hell do I support out of this? Something has to give, and something I believe is going to give. This is unsustainable for a country as important as ours.
When you say something is going to give, how do you see that panning out?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think we're living in incredibly volatile times. I'm speaking to you from France. A few years ago, most people have never heard of Macron. He's now the president. He's one of the most important people on the planet. You look at what's happening in America with Donald Trump. The day before he was elected, most people in the world said that guy's never going to be president. He is, and it's terrifying for the world. Boris Johnson is now the Prime Minister of the UK. I can't even believe I'm saying those words. So all I'm saying is we're living in volatile times. Tribalism is breaking down. But those parties, and they're both, you've got a populism of the right now and a populism of the left. You've got Johnson trying to recreate some mythical sort of Churchillian fantasy inside his head, and you've got the Labour Party who talk about having a radical progressive agenda, but actually are pretty backward looking in a lot of their policies. So it isn't going to work, and the country is going to suffer for it. The country is suffering already. Where's this massive hit on the pound happening? It's not kind of technical. It's happening because the world is looking on as the people that I spoke to in Australia, to a man and woman last week. Didn't be a single, well, I met one. I met one person who thought that actually this Boris Johnson thing could work for the country. I met one guy who thought that Brexit was a good idea. The world is looking on at us. We're a global joke at the moment. And I guess what it is, I'm, fed up, in common with millions of people, I'm fed up pretending that actually, it's probably all going to work out okay. The way things are, it's not going to work out okay.
So if there was a fantasy ballot paper where you could vote for either Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson, what would you do? Spoil your paper?
That is a hard one. That is a hard one. And I know a lot of Labour MPs. I mean, you've got to remember, at the last election, a lot of Labour candidates went round knocking on doors and they said, look, vote for me to be your MP, but don't worry, we're not going to win. Some of them even put that on their leaflets. So it's a difficult one. I think deep down, on the compass, I'm always going to be more Labour, and I could never, ever be a Tory, and I could certainly never, ever vote for Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister, and I did vote for Jeremy Corbyn last time. But I just think that where we are now, my partner Fiona, she quit a year ago, the party. We've talked about it every day since, and if I just tell you again, the three things she highlighted: lack of leadership on Brexit, failure to tackle anti-Semitism, no real radical policy thinking that, really sort of gave you a sense of grasping the future. And okay, they've moved in the right direction on Brexit to a position that I find much more palatable, but clearly with Jeremy Corbyn still being dragged kicking and screaming to it, still determined not to really get engaged in it. And on the other two, I think you could argue that the Labour Party's gone backwards.
If he does step down as Labour leader before the next general election, will you renew your Labour Party membership?
I mean, it depends whether they'd have me back, I guess. But look, I don't think it's just about him. I think it's about the politics that he's allowed to flourish inside the party. And I do think there's an issue here about some of the people that he's brought in very senior positions who aren't actually Labour, who've been communists or who've been Stalinists or been Trotskyists, but they're now in very senior positions around him and controlling the machinery of the party, which is what they're more interested in. And there's always been that element in the Labour Party of some people who are more interested in controlling the party than they are in winning power in the country. So it would depend. If they just sort of replaced it with somebody who's going to represent that same politics, then I think that politics has had it. I think the reason why Labour is languishing in the polls is not just about Brexit, it's not just about anti-Semitism, it's not just about the division, which, I accept I'm contributing to, I guess. It's about the rejection of a sort of politics that most people in this country find unpalatable.